Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. A leader of one of the 5 clans that make up the Wet'suwet'en Nation says they need to discuss the pipeline crisis together. Skiddan is a wing chief in the Grizzly House, part of the Wet'suwet'en Bear and Wolf clan. He called a meeting for the clan chiefs in the tribal feast house. On the agenda, the Coastal GasLink pipeline and safety for everyone involved in the growing opposition. Skiddan says all Wet'suwet'en clans have not met in recent years, and this has to change. The group Indigenous Youth and Allies for Wet'suwet'en are in their 2nd day of occupying the Department of Justice building in Ottawa. They're demanding Minister David Lametti meet with Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. Jamie Pashagumscum visited with them this morning.
Mi'kmaq land defender Sophie Sadars said they spoke with Lametti Monday evening.
He explained how this was a domestic issue, what is happening in Wet'suwet'en territories, and the human rights violations happening on their territories is a domestic and provincial issue, and that the federal government cannot get involved.
In a statement, Lametti said he has spoken by phone with the protesters and have heard their demands. I committed to bringing their demands to my cabinet colleagues and engaging with them in good faith in my capacity and within the confines of my powers as a federal minister. At an Assembly of First Nations gathering in December, the Justice Minister stressed the need for Canadian and Indigenous laws to coexist.
In our pluralistic country, with its deep, dark history of colonialism, we have a responsibility, I have a responsibility as a Minister of the Crown to rethink this approach. For meaningful reconciliation to happen, Indigenous legal traditions must be recognized in their own right and applied alongside Western legal traditions.
Lametti even alluded to the Supreme Court's 1997 Delgamuuk ruling, which recognized the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief's jurisdiction over their unceded lands. Demonstrators don't accept his deflection to the province and have given him another 24 hours to meet their demands. They said Lametti's inaction would prove to them that reconciliation is dead.
Further reconciliation in the future should immediately stop, because reconciliation is meaningless if it is not applied to situations and human rights violations that are happening right now.
Jamie Pashagumscum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, hundreds also took to the streets in Winnipeg Monday evening. Demonstrators gathered in the city's downtown mall before blocking 3 high-traffic intersections.
If you condemn pipeline through Indigenous territories, free!
It's estimated 600 people showed up to voice their concerns. Among them were Manitoba NDP MPs Nikki Ashton and Leah Gazan. Part of the crowd marched to Winnipeg's historic intersection Portage and Main, where they blocked traffic with a round dance that lasted an hour and a half. This is the 2nd demonstration to happen in the city in the past week. Protests in British Columbia delayed the province's speech from the throne. Protesters occupied the legislature for the 5th day running. They shouted shame at politicians as they tried to enter the legislature. Demonstrators are blocking all the entrances to the legislature. And the conflict in BC made its way into a conference on modern-day treaties in Gatineau, Quebec. BC Treaty Commissioner Celeste Haldane said modern-day treaties force stakeholders to negotiate resource development. Haldane would have liked everyone to have been at the table in negotiating the Coastal GasLink pipeline and hopes lessons are learned so that the Wet'suwet'en standoff isn't repeated.
And whether it's through treaties, agreements, or other constructive arrangements, that would have helped, I think, facilitate a more positive conversation with those nations along the line. And again, I'm not into divide and conquer tactics, and so I think everyone being in the room at the same time and having discussions would have been, think probably more advantageous for everyone involved. And at the end of the day, I'm worried about those that are on the ground. I'm worried about their safety, and I think the rest of us should be, because bringing in the military and militarizing these situations isn't helpful. It doesn't de-escalate the situation.
And now back to Tyendinaga, where Annette Francis brings us an update.
This quiet crossing right here is causing shutdowns of CN rail lines and havoc for thousands of Via Rail travelers. This morning, the protesters crossed the tracks to meet with the Ontario Provincial Police Liaison Team and the sheriff.
Trespassing on CN railway right-of-way at the railway crossing of mile point.
They were read and served with another injunction, giving police the power to arrest people if they continue to interfere with railway traffic.
This river of life is a continuum of time. There's no break. There's no ending in this belt because it doesn't have an expiry date.
The OPP liaison team were given a lesson on the two-row wampum and its importance in negotiations. And in the end, there was no agreement to leave.
I think you made a point, and I think a lot of people have heard you. And I'm not sure, but I know I'd really like to go home, and I wonder if maybe you guys would like to go home now too, to your families. And
many here say they'll remain in spite of the injunction. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory.
And in other news, earlier this month, an inquest ruled that the death of Cynthia Blackjack was an accident. She died en route to hospital in a plane. Chris McIntyre went to her home community for reaction.
It would be nice if it would prevent something like this happening again, but I doubt it.
Little Sam and Carmacks First Nation Chief Russell Blackjack is Cynthia Blackjack's cousin and knows it'll take a joint effort to prevent another incident from happening again.
It's all a matter of the First Nations and the governments making sure that it does work. We have to keep on it.
A panel of 6 jurors spent 10 days listening to testimonies from healthcare professionals and reviewing evidence such as medical records and phone recordings. The final verdict, Blackjack's death was deemed as accidental. 8 recommendations were given to the Yukon government and the Little Sam and Carmacks First Nation. Recommendations included developing a curriculum on cultural safety specific to the Little Sam and Carmacks First Nation, and to have dedicated medical transportation to Whitehorse for Carmacks residents who are not sick enough for medevac but are deemed to require a level of care that the Whitehorse Hospital can provide.
With the RCMP.
Chief Russell Blackjack reviewed the recommendations.
There's a few things that we can, we can start working on right away. And there's a couple things that we've already started.
Like the recommendation for a fully staffed wellness hub.
Place we put in place with YTG here is had all good intentions, but it just didn't work out because what we didn't hold into factor was people leaving and how long, if they get another job or they pulled out,
A review of the recommendations with council members has yet to happen, but Blackjack says he already has a recommendation for better communication between government and First Nation departments. We reached out to the Yukon government for comment and were told that they are still reviewing the jury's decision and recommendations, but they did give a written statement. The Cynthia Blackjack inquest was important for our territory and our government. We appreciate the work of all those involved in the inquest and will carefully review the findings. Although 8 recommendations were given, no timeline for implementation was ever mentioned. Chief Blackjack says that once his council reviews the recommendation, he feels it's up to them to start the process. Until then, it'll be a long time before trust gets rebuilt in the village of Carmacks.
We as a people, I think, have to work through. Hopefully we can find a solution to it. I pray that it doesn't happen again,
Chris McIntyre, APTN National News, Carmacks.
Time to step aside for a quick break, but there's still a lot more to come. Stick around. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 0 with a rain-snow mix in St. John's, +3 in Halifax, -15 under sunny skies for Nain, 26 below in Inukjuak, 0 in Montreal, -1 for Quebec City, +2 in Toronto and Windsor, sunny and +1 in Ottawa. 17 below with snow in Thunder Bay, -23 with flurries in Sioux Lookout, -28 and snow for Churchill, snow and 24 below for God's Lake, sunny and -23 in Winnipeg. Welcome back. St. Anne's residential school survivors are back in court in Toronto. They're fighting the federal government's long-standing denial of information that could help reopen compensation claims. NDP MP Charlie Angus and a number of survivors held a press conference ahead of the hearing.
This is the toxic nature of the Justice Department in Canada. You know, Prime Minister Trudeau, Carolyn Bennett make beautiful promises, but their lawyers come in here with brass knuckles and fight and will use every intimidation tactic. What's really powerful to be with the St. Anne survivors is they are not intimidated. So they're a symbol for all the other people across the country whose rights have been denied and who've been undermined by trusting the government.
The Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan was at an event on One Arrow First Nation. Organizers called it a step forward towards reconciliation. APTN's Priscilla Wolf reports.
Elizabeth II
The Honourable Russ Morasti, Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, attended a signing of a declaration for reconciliation on the One Arrow First Nation. The signing by the Prairie Rivers Reconciliation Committee included leaders and members from First Nations, communities, and towns surrounding One Arrow. Over 16 members of the committee are committed to reconciliation in the area. This is one of a few reconciliation committees in Saskatchewan that were created after the call to action from leadership, organizations, and community members.
It means a lot to me as Lieutenant Governor, but also as a First Nations person, because I know the history of Saskatchewan and to a certain extent the history of Canada and the work of the TRC, very important work which identified calls to action that we need to pay attention to.
Morasti says witnessing this signing is significant.
When I see something like this event happen today with the diverse communities that are committed to this declaration, it really warms my heart. It really does. It's just, you know, it's one thing to talk about it, and that's what, you know, the TRC talked about talking, but also acting. And so when you see 22 community leaders come together and you visually see them signing this declaration, it really hits home, and we know it means something then.
Chief Tricia Sutherland says she is honored to host the reconciliation event on her community, a One Arrow First Nation. Her mother was a survivor, and Chief Sutherland says sitting on this reconciliation committee has helped her share her mother's story.
Like, my mom was a residential school survivor. Unfortunately, she passed over 20 years ago, but we know the stories of her struggles, right? And I shared those stories at our blanket exercise, and it was phenomenal how the rest of the committee took that in and felt her experience that I shared.
She feels the work the committee does gives a sense of belonging and understanding within the group who are working on reconciliation. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, One Arrow First Nation.
There was a lot of excitement in Yellowknife this weekend as Hockey Day in Canada came to town for the first time. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs now with how one Sawtooth community has a unique connection to the game.
Delaney, Northwest Territories, located on the shores of Great Bear Lake. Once known as Fort Franklin because famed colonizer Sir John Franklin spent time in the community during the 1820s. Chief Leroy Andre says elders told the story of watching the first recorded game right here on this lake.
We couldn't wait till the ice froze because that was our playground. Back then we'd never had television or anything else.
Andre says before winter hunting, kids would rest up by picking up their sticks.
a lot of these ladies and people came to watch, these non-Indigenous people, Franklin's men, play hockey on Little Grey Goose Lake. And they were just so mesmerized by these people that can control themselves on glare ice.
Orlina Modeste is the go-to person for organized sports. She fundraises for baseball, volleyball, and hockey.
It does take a lot out of a person. I know I do. Usually the first one there when we're hosting tournaments and the last one to leave, and I'm there to fundraise, and now I have small children.
To play the game in an isolated winter road community makes traveling for tournaments costly.
Anywhere between 15 to 30,000. One year we drove all the way from here to Whitehorse and back.
Despite the cost, the small community of 530 will continue to play.
We come from what's known as the birthplace of hockey, and we take a lot of pride in that.
Charlotte Mort Jacobs, APTN National News, Delaney.
Coastal GasLink, Trans Mountain, and Teck Resources Frontier Mine are among the topics on tonight's episode of Face to Face, coming up right after the news. Our guest is Ariel Deranger of Indigenous Climate Action. She says Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's war room and planned inquiry into anti-energy campaigns is a waste of money.
These anti-energy, foreign-funded radicals, as they've been called in the past, let's be real. Alberta's entire economy is funded by foreign interests. We have multinational corporations from all over the world that are dumping billions of dollars into Alberta and the national economy. The foreign-funded radicals that we should be looking at are the oil and gas sector. They're the ones that are wreaking havoc on the ecosystems, the rights of Indigenous communities, and ultimately destabilizing an economy for future generations.
Here's a look at the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast. Picking back up in northern Alberta, minus 17 for Fort McMurray. Minus 7 and snow in Medicine Hat. Plus 8 in Victoria and Tofino. Minus 8 in Fort Nelson. 0 with snow for Smithers. Minus 33 in Old Crow. Minus 3 with snow for Whitehorse. Minus 30 in Yellowknife. 26 below for Norman Wells. Minus 29 in Sax Harbor, 32 below for Colville Lake. Minus 34 in Chesterfield, 33 below in Whale Cove. Minus 29 for Resolute, 33 below in Joe Haven. Welcome back. Being part of the LGBTQ2S community often means living with daily discrimination. So what does that mean for those living on reserve? In part 2 of her 2-part series, Tamara Pimentel uncovers the effects inequality can have in a tight-knit community.
8-year-old Lilith Left Hand was born and raised on the Stoney Nakoda Nation in Alberta. But he has never been a member. His parents, Danielle Mark and Ava Left Hand, who are members, say their son is being discriminated against because they are a same-sex couple. They've been fighting for Lilith's membership since the day he was born, but this is about more than gaining recognition.
I don't know if he's going to have his own home when we're gone, and he grew up here. I don't want him to get pushed out just because of what list he's on. And I want him to feel pride in his community.
It means that they consider us a family. He'll have all the benefits we have.
And they aren't the only ones.
Family's important. Family's always been important.
In Vancouver, Two-Spirit father Wayne Wallace is fighting a similar battle.
When I came to accept myself for being two-spirited, a member of the LGBT community, it was the first thing that I thought in my mind back then, 20-some odd years ago, was I'm never going to have kids.
Wallace and his husband have twin boys through a surrogate mother. One son is Wallace's biological child. The other is the biological child to his husband, who's Australian.
They're both my children. I created them with my husband, the closest to a heterosexual couple can create their own family.
Wallace is a member of the Madawaska Maliseet Nation in New Brunswick. While both of his sons are status Indians under the Indian Act, only one child is registered as a member of his band.
You know, we can't have children the traditional way, right? It's just not going to happen. We're two men, we needed the help, and we had the intent of creating our family this way. There might be those that decide to adopt. Should they be also stopped from registering those children as they would consider them their own, to be members of our community?
The Madawaska Maliseet Nation hasn't responded to our request for a comment, but Wallace says members voted on a membership code that allows the band to decide who can be a member and who can't.
5 years ago, our community enacted a new membership code, because we've had control over our membership for quite a while now, I think since about mid-80s. And the new code requires male offsprings to undergo DNA testing. I can't understand why blood has to be the only component that makes you Indigenous.
These parents, they all have one question. What does create a member of an Indigenous community?
I think there's a number of level of layers that come with that, and in understanding indigeneity of an individual. And I think culture, family, traditions, all of that language, it all comes and is blended together.
They always say tradition. Tradition, we're all close-knit community. And now they're just pick and choosing who stays, who goes. That's just, like, if they're going to say tradition, and stick to tradition and staying strong as a community.
For Mark and Left Hand, traditions mean inclusion. And they say all types of discrimination need to come to an end.
We need to grow. We have feelings too, and we all should see each other equally, not based on what gender we like or whatever. It's based on being strong here as a community, staying together. Just try not to lose hope. Trying to stay upbeat as I can for my son. I want him to feel pride in our family. And
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News on the Stoney Nakoda First Nation.
And for much more on that Perspective series, join us tomorrow live at 3 p.m. Eastern as we put the issue in focus. That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For the very latest, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Stick around. Face to Face is next. We'll see you back here tomorrow.